All right. Welcome to our online folks. We're so glad you're here. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're here tonight to celebrate Blues in Stereo. These are early poems and works by Langston Hughes. They are collected by none other than Danez Smith. Give it up for Danez. Danez is the author of 4 poetry collections, including Bluff, Homie, and Don't Call Us Dead. Danez won the Ford Prize for Best Collection, the Minnesota Book Award in Poetry, the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry, and has been a finalist for the NAACP Image Award in Poetry, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the National Book Award. Danez lives in Minneapolis with their people. And we're here with 2 of Atlanta's own, W.J. Lofton, who's on the left. W.J. Lofton, yes, is a Chicago-born poet and multimodal artist, but we're claiming W.J. Lofton as our own. He's the author of A Garden for Black Boys Between the Stages of Soil and Stardust, and the forthcoming poetry collection, Boy Maybe, which we will be, yes, it's beautiful, beautiful book. We're going to be selling, yes, get that cover. We're going to be celebrating it here at Charis or in community with Charis and other booksellers in the spring. We're really, really excited. You can pre-order Boy Maybe now. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And pre-orders really matter. So please go ahead and do that. Lofton has received fellowships from Cave Canem and Emory University. His work has appeared in Time, Wildness, Obsidian, and Scallywag. He lives here in Atlanta, where he co-curates Rebellion, a writing studio. So welcome to W.J. Lofton. And last but not least, the one and only Jericho Brown. Yes, is the recipient of the Whitting Award, Writers Award, and fellowships from the Academy of American Poets, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Yes, come on.
I'm missing.
What's missing? What is missing? We gonna get to it. He is the winner of the 2020 Pulitzer Prize. He is also a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award. Yo, we're gonna be here all night because Jericho. Most recently, so in case you didn't know that you were in the company of many greats, you do now.
Bettina Judge just coming out and saying, "He rich," and I really appreciate it because he deserved it. And it's just so nice. Heather Crystal's here. I want everybody online to know that Heather Crystal's here, Bettina Judge is here, and Dante Michelle is here, and Nicholas Goodley is here, and all the poets of Atlanta are here. This is so exciting for me. I'm so Courtney Faye. I'm so glad. I didn't know that was her because she said, "I'm ass." She's the healthy one of us. So yeah, thank y'all for being here.
Thank y'all for being here. Thank you both for agreeing to do this. Sit up here with me. Talk about good old Langston for a little while. For those of y'all, so how Blues and Stereo came to be. These spices, how they came to be was, I don't know if I was the first person or the fifth person, but they just reached out and asked if I want to do this thing. That they had some unpublished poems by Langston Hughes if I do something. This is with a Legacy Lit. They have a wonderful in this series. They did a wonderful collection by an unreleased collection by Intozaki Shagre called "It's in the Black Song." That was curated as an introduction by the great so please go pick up that. So they wanted to keep on doing this, right? And so like I said, I don't know if I was number 1 or number 5, but eventually they got to me. Was like, you want to do this? And I said, of course. And we did it. There were humps and bumps along the way, and discoveries and all the things and tears, all the things that come with making a book. But this is where we are now, this wonderful, I think wonderful, just like view of a young poet. One thing that was really happening for me when I was working on this book, time really collapsed in a way, and I think got funny and loopy because we always say, I think I've always known that 100 years ago is not that long ago, but to feel such urgency from these poems that were old by the time I arrived to them when I was young. And old in a way, right? When you're in youth, it feels so long ago, right? Maybe it's because I'm getting older too, that I realize that this is just a yesterday ago. A lot of these hopes, a lot of these dreams, a lot of these understandings that we're reading from him. And also that I'm older than he was writing all this stuff. Right, that I'm sort of older, like I felt like an old teacher meddling in a young person's work, right? Which is really beautiful to also see how clear and understanding he was of his mission from such a young age, right? The first time you read Negro Speaks of Rivers, it comes to you as one of the great American poems, right? Like this poem that is so storied, so anthologized, right? One of the most important poems in our canon. And then you don't really, because it has all that history and weight by the times it makes it to you, you don't think about how precious and wonderful and awesome and mind-blowing it is that it was written by an 18-year-old on the train on the back of an envelope, and he didn't know the way he would shape a history and a possibility of what we can do in language and in ourselves. Just by writing his words down and loving us real loud. So I'm happy today to be able to lift up the name and the legacy of Langston Hughes tonight with y'all. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to read some poems, some of our own, some of Langston's too, and we're going to talk about Langston, and we're going to talk about how certain themes from the book might play into our own roles as practice, right? We'll play in history. We'll also look towards the future, all that kind of stuff, right? Is that okay with y'all? You ain't got no choice. All right, cool. I like that was a serious yes. I love it. All right, which one of us want to start off? I don't mind. You want to go? You want to go? Who want to go? I'll go. Okay. Wait. Let's put some. Huh?
Us go and then the next person goes to the next person,
we can talk in between. We can do whatever.
Oh, okay.
How you want to do it?
I was thinking like I could read a poem.
You read a poem. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I love that.
But I just didn't know you were going to do that, so I have to read from my phone, and I'm saying that in case there's some people out here who feel like that's somehow disrespectful.
No, we want you to read one.
Danez, you should go last because you're the guest.
Okay, cool. I am the guest.
I should go first.
I'm acting like this is my house. Okay.
Because I'm the oldest. The gift. I worried you so when I knew what I was too young to know of where you could go. I worried you'd never grow, but you did. You got impressive with it. You began to show up when I needed you most and when I did not. I get older and appreciate you more for that show. No pills. You made memories the way rabbits populate burrows. I thank you, my hero, my accurate arrow. Maybe no man ever loves me inside out, forehead to toenail, but Matthew blushed when first he saw you. The elevator to our floor rose so slow, each number burning a brown glow. We were almost nude by the time we got to the door. It may have been the best night before we learned to look low and away, or to say no. For that, I can thank you. Oh, my giving gift, my living lever of perfection, only pulled as proof of hope. Doors parting open, lift ready to go. I love you so.
Ooh, beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Woo. I love your new poems.
It's also a challenge. So everybody on the
in
panel,
what way?
you have to all write a poem about your dick.
Okay. I have several times, but we can always return to where we've been.
A new one.
A new one. A new one. Okay.
That was my first time.
Yeah. How did you feel about it?
I was real scared.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very proud of myself when it was over.
Nice.
I was like, wow, I really did that.
That is, yeah, that's a big step. I mean, you know, you're no stranger to the erotics.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when you're thinking about Langston Hughes, there's a way that the poems come to you because it's him as great. So even, and it's sometimes clear reading Langston Hughes, he's simply having a good time in a poem, simply making music in a poem, and that there is transcendence, but the sort of, the way we think of a poem's importance with a capital P for poem.
Yeah.
And so I think I had a fear as I started writing the poem. I'm like, am I really writing about this? Or is that like much too inward in a way? And so obviously because of that, I have to figure out a way to look out. But I think, you know, when I think about Langston Hughes, it's so interesting, and you write about this in the introduction, as well as what I like about this book. Danez has an introduction to the book, and he's also sectioned off poems in different ways. And so each section has sort of a small paragraph or two to introduce the section of the reason why it's sectioned off. But there's a way that you mention this, like Hughes is actually the renegade among the people of his time. He's very much a modernist, and we know that because he's really interested in writing a 2 or 3 line poem. But he's also, as a Harlem Renaissance writer, so many of his contemporaries, as also is a modernist thing to do, are trying to find ways to claim forms. You know, that's why we get If We Must Die, that sonnet from Claude McKay, Yet Do I Marvel, that sonnet from County Cullen, who, as far as I know, only, you know, everything was always about a sonnet but for them. Other kinds of obvious, you know, formal poems, and they're doing things with those forms that blackify them in such a beautiful way. And Hughes is not interested in that. Instead, Hughes is much more interested, also a modernist move,
being black.
Well, but also in the invention of a form that he believes is already ours, right? That you take what you hear in music through the blues and you make it a form that is formal in the poem, but you also make it a feeling, right? And what I love about the early work, a poem like My Friend, a poem like For My People, poems like one of my favorite poems by Langston Hughes, The Island, which is not in this collection, but which I love so much, that there's something about the poems, even if they don't follow the blues stanza as we think of it, we know we're hearing the blues when we hear them. And I think that's always been my goal as a poet, right? Like, because that is Duende. How do you get that in the thing that you're trying to make? Anyway, so I talked.
And you did real good.
Thank you so much, Danez.
And you did real good. You did real good. Okay. Since we're already talking about Langston, who he was, who maybe the importance, right? Maybe that's also like who we need him to be. And you wrote a poem about your penis. I feel like I'll ask this to both of y'all, maybe just right now, and then we'll go back into the poem. I've been thinking a lot because I've been getting the question a lot about Langston's queerness, right? And, you know, it's always kind of, you know, it feels like a sometimes gossipy, like, you know, was he, wasn't he? What do you think? You know, da-da-da-da-da. And the questions I've kind of had back to that framework, that seeing of him, right? And, you know, it's no joke that, like, you know, everywhere I've been, every book says, they're like, oh, let's get all the Black queer people together to celebrate Langston, right? Still under this maybe of him. So I think my questions are, why do you think we need him to be queer in this way that we need to see? Do you, and personally, I guess, like, what do you have a desire to see us in him in that pronounced way? And I guess also just like, if beyond all that, do you see anything queer or that helps you think through queerness in the poetry or the life of Langston Hughes, right? Because I think, you know, there's sort of this always, was he, wasn't he, was he bisexual, asexual? Everybody says something different. We know he was with the girls up in Harlem. And
Well, we know he was with the dogs.
But that's what I mean. I mean, the girls. I mean, the dolls.
He was with the dolls.
The dolls, you know?
No,
They was married and everything, but still the dolls. I guess like what is I guess I don't know. What is this queer need we have to see him through that frame?
Well, I think that can y'all hear me? Well, I think that it's what he reaches for in his poems, and even how you start this collection is you start with a Black woman domestic worker, and I think it takes a particular type of queerness to reach for that and to think about that. And I think about true genius, it affords other thinking to take place, and that inherently is queerness.
Yeah.
And so it's not that I need him to be queer, it's that that's how he presents himself to me. As I'm reading his work, as I'm encountering his work, I am allowed to see myself. You say that you are able to find your identities through his work, and you also talk about his work in a very ecstatic way.
Yeah.
Right. There's this. I just want to read this really quick. You say something about like the poem crusting over. You know, like you're expressing ecstasy.
Yeah.
And only queer people talk about writing and art and being in that way without violence taking place in the writing and the living of that.
Word. Beautiful. I love that edge of queerness that you're seeing. I also love how you're talking about how he's able to view women then, right? And the body of the woman. Because it's often, I know there's a couple, you know, it starts off with two poems where the woman is very maternal, right? But that is not his only relationship to her, right? But maybe that queerness allows him to approach femininity in a way that always isn't so colored by desire, right? And now then becomes maybe more about the mother figure or the sister figure, right? It's not that his poems are absent of desire too either, right? Because he's writing about jazz, you got to write about sex. So you're writing about Black people, you got to write about sex. But there, I think I felt what you're saying when I was reading the poems and didn't always know how to name it, or if that was something I felt called into naming. But I appreciate that.
You say
that relationship with women. Yeah.
You say in his poems, Hughes showed us that a dream could dry, fester, run, stink, crust, and sugar over, and even explode. That's ecstasy.
Yeah. We know a thing or two about ecstasy for sure. Amen.
I asked Arnold Rampersad about this somewhere between 2007 and 2012, and he told me that one of the things that he wanted to do, I haven't seen him do it since that time, so maybe he's not going to do it, I don't know. He told me he wanted to write a slimmer biography. He wrote, you know, the biography that is 2 volumes, and he said if he had the opportunity to write that slimmer biography, he would in that concede that Langston Hughes was obviously gay. He didn't say this, and I wasn't drinking it, but there was a lot of wine on the table when we had this conversation. But my memory from the conversation is that he didn't concede that Langston Hughes was gay in either of those 2 very big biographies because he didn't want to hurt him. I mean, it's the same reason it was very difficult for him to write about. I have a poem about this, so this is why I have this poem called Proof. Maybe it's not out yet, so I don't know why I'm telling y'all that. But you know, because of the work that Arnold Rampersad was doing, he knew every time Langston Hughes caught an STD. And because he knew every time Langston Hughes caught an STD, he could sort of figure when and where he got it and who was around. Do you know what I mean? So So I remember in this conversation very distinctly him saying when he first found out that Langston Hughes had gonorrhea, he said to me, you know, when I found that out, I just thought, not my Langston. And I think part of what happens with a lot of people who think of themselves as the preservers of a legacy, they don't want any, because they are capable of that thought. They don't want to risk anybody having that thought. I also think, you know, well, that's all I'll say about that.
Okay.
So I just think Langston Hughes was gay. I mean, and also, you know, or socially, Langston, I mean, you know, you can be a straight guy who ain't got nothing but male friends that are all gay. I'm not saying that's not possible, but socially, all these other people Langston Hughes hung out with were definitely unquestionably gay, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's how kind of I felt. I think the question, the other way I've answered it is just sort of like who he was zooming knew he was. And that's what's important in this context, right? And so why do we trouble history to identify?
But I mean but that's the reason why it is important that we have him, right? That over and over again, I think we have to make it clear that our legacy is our work, no matter, right? And that if you are moved by the work, then you have to also accept the life that came with it.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying? And therefore, we don't have to do this kind of pretending about the work of poetry. If you think of poetry the same, I mean, people get mad at me about this, but I do. I think of poetry the same way I think of a microwave or a car or a toaster. You know, I think of it as usable. I think of it as something that does something. I think of it as automotive. Like it does work on me. It's there for a reason. It's a tool. Do you know what I mean? And because I think of it that way, you know, I can find out whatever I want to find out about Langston Hughes. You know, I can find out whatever I want to find out about who did the lights. Well, let's say who did the phone. Well, let's say who did I can find out anything I want to find out about what's the guy that made the Apple phone?
Oh, Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I can find that out, and I'm not gonna give my phone away. I'm not gonna not turn on my lights. If I find out, I'm not gonna not be on the phone. You know, I'm not there because the poem does the work that the poem does.
Yeah. Which is such a powerful statement. Thank you for saying that, because but I also, in what you're saying, I don't want us to lose the fact that, you know, even for the biography, right, the biographer, this need to protect, because there was a thing, right, where like queerness will put you in danger, right, whether it is your legacy or your lived life, right?
It will.
And I think that sometimes is lost in when we talk about like, well, Willie was. Well, let's talk about how dangerous or how what an effect that could have had on his life when you're already black, when you already got McCarthy putting you on the list.
Yeah, when you're a communist in the 1950s.
You know, so you have all these things that have to get you, and then to be a sissy on top of that, good lord.
But I think, like, you know, he speaks to the danger of like children, of women, and to do that also is like a queer lens.
Yes. And back to that, right? So even while you're in danger, right? Even as you live in the context that is dangerous to your living, you're living your livelihood and your literal mortality. You are still making these brave acts that sometimes come out as bold and so much, right? Because somebody reads like becomes a book, and all three of us are able to sit and write the poems that we write that you could not write with as much openness and flair and, you know, unabashedness about who we are and who you can see within the work, right? That is only because Langston, you know, even if he didn't make the choice to be, you know, what maybe Bruce Nugent, a couple apartments down, was doing, a great artist, by the way, who's sort of, you know, a lot of time really good. Not making the same choices, right? But Langston was being real black, real, you know, real Negro-ish at a time when that was not the same.
I want to hear a poem for Jimmy, but I do, just on this point, I do want to say, and I have an essay where I talk about this a little. It's called "To Be Asked for a Kiss," and that one is online. But you know, when Langston Hughes writes in persona, whenever the persona is a man, it's almost not a persona because it's some position he was in. Like theme for an English B is a student, so therefore it could be Langston Hughes, except he didn't go to the college that he mentions in the poem. Or, you know, sometimes in a poem there's like a sailor, but then you know Langston Hughes was indeed for a second a sailor. Do you know what I mean? But all the other persona poems are women. And often, more often than not, they are women who are experiencing unrequited love. And I just wanted to say that there is something interesting about that. Well, so I'll let that go. I mean, there is something at least R&B about that.
So also a bottom is what I'm hearing.
Actually, well, I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up. I made a note of the essay that you made on the suicide note. But it's not in this collection, but it is Song for a Suicide. And what you say about that is, you say, yes, we could drown in a river, but we could also drown in someone's loving arms. Now, doesn't that sound like the blues? And so I want to read Song for a Suicide, and I'll read one of my poems. Oh, the sea is deep, and a knife is sharp, and a poison acid burns, but they all bring rest in a deep, long sleep for which the tired soul yearns. They all bring rest in a nothingness from where no road returns. Yeah, this is new. The Lord is American. The world undresses its wounds. It wounds this father, his memory torn clouds, forgetful weather. God's goodness licks Bo's bone clean. Our fingers twist crumbs from air. We are hungry children, abandoned by our country for bombs, for rockets' red glare. How could we ever be patriots? My father is my flag. The national anthem is every word, every single word. My mother could not whisper, could not say. Her father colonized her, made her mother nasty with jealousy, could not say she can't stay in this world of touching. It maims, it elects evil, it is too gendered, it kneels on Sunday. The Lord is American and aims his rifle at us, his children, once beggars rise into gorillas. Ooh.
That's the poem you read first at the reading the other day when Bettina snatched the eyebrows off. That's good.
That was really good. Yeah.
Are you gonna read a poem?
I am. Should I do that now?
I mean, you know.
Okay. Well, let me do it now then. Although I think, what I love about the poem you just read. Oh, I should read talking to this. Yes, I should. Sorry, online. No, what I love about the poem you just read, it's just, well, one, it's just a good poem. And I love thinking about it in tandem with the Suicide Note poem. Right, which is making me think of the suicide that is being American. I'm latching on to that how could we be patriots line that you read,
which was inspired by the discourse that was happening on Twitter.
Word. Yeah, me and Jericho had a discourse one day.
We gonna have another one
because I'm gonna read a poem that I don't think you like.
I can't wait.
Well, you had posted online once that you was like, somebody talked to me about this poem by Danez that's going around. And I was like, oh, I don't think Jericho liked that one, but I like it.
Oh no, I wanted to know about it.
Yeah, you wanted to know about it. Yeah, so we can know about it.
Is this the poem about Barack Obama?
Yeah, that's the one we read.
I don't dislike this poem.
Okay, great.
I actually, well, you're going to read the poem. I think the poem's brilliant and very well
But
made.
I think what you wanted to know was, I think we got to this, was a generational difference in understanding of.
Yes, which that's what it was about.
Yeah.
But I mean,
we were born at different times.
Very, very different times.
In different places.
I don't. Yes.
Word. Gen X millennial. We got it.
No, I actually I love this poem.
Thank you.
And I taught it.
Oh, really? I don't know how that went.
I said to my students the thing I didn't understand about it.
Right.
But I also said, you're going to read the poem. What I love about this poem is that even though there's a thing I don't understand about it, it's like the thing I don't understand ends up being moved because the poem is tight in a certain way. Does that make sense?
It does.
So read the poem.
I'm gonna read the poem. I'm gonna read one of Langston first, and then I'm gonna
I didn't read a Langston Hughes poem. I didn't know we were doing it that way, so I don't want to feel I got to do that.
You do got to do that.
I have one I love, and I'm gonna read. But read.
I'm gonna read my two. Okay. Well, what I also want to say about your poem and about the disc, is just like, so one, the suicide that is being American, right? I think that's where I want to go, and I think often about the Langston Hughes poem, Make America America Again, which is eerily close to that MAGA, right? But I think we often forget the parentheses within that, which is America, where it's the negations, right? America was never America to me. It was never mine, all this stuff, right? And so, yeah, that was, even in the book, right? I think you see Langston in a way who is very clear-eyed about America, but like kind of loving of it at the same time. He definitely loves Black people, loves the South, just loves us.
I think Langston Hughes goes out of his way for white people too, and
no. I'm gonna say it was that.
James Baldwin does too. A lot of people they go out of their way.
They be like, hey, why are we doing this, white people? Then I was just like, I'm not interested. But then I might be interested again, right? Because sometimes it depends on when I have the strength and see the utility in that conversation, which is not all the time. All right, let me read my little two. I'm gonna just read A Negro Speaks of Rivers because the poem I'm gonna read references rivers and Abe Lincoln, which appear in this poem. And I think the river in my poem is maybe one of Langston's rivers. If not, just think about stream of consciousness. But anyways, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo when it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. All right. So then here's mine.
Can I say while you're looking for that, I just love like the metaphysical mind it takes as an 18-year-old to think that line. My soul has grown deep. It's crazy. Y'all, that's crazy. Like that is crazy. That is writing. I'm sorry. But my soul has grown deep. And then to find a metaphor for that, by which from that point on, we have to rethink whatever we thought the soul might have looked like or what its substance was. Do you know what I mean? Or how it's made or how it feels. Anyway, I'm interested. I've always been taken by it. I'm like, bro,
and it's such an old
right that day
too, right? Because one, you just got to be old to know all them rivers, and I've seen all that. But like he had the nerve to call it the Negro, right? To put us all in one body, right? This timeless, ancient body. Right, by nature of the river being ancient and you knowing it, that makes you just as ancient as well, right? So at 18, which I think a lot of us, I remember when I was 18 and a lot of other 18-year-olds writing poems around me, saying stuff real declarative was hard. And so to put yourself as the poet in that position and say, I'm gonna take on this almost godly position as the Negro and write about all these rivers.
I think what's magical is that like he's on his way to Mexico to ask his father for money.
Yes, he is.
And so he's calling upon all this knowledge, right? That transcends like what I think he may have known inside. And it just becomes this thing that carries him continuously. I think that's beautiful. And that's what the poem reveals to himself.
Yeah. And then, I don't know, he's just smart too, right? Because then you just proud that he knows geography. And it's Herster. All right, let me read my little poem. This is called, where's it at? Last Black American Poem. What What do you need to know? Nothing. There's a hill in here called Bascom Hill, where I went to college in Wisconsin. There's a big hill called Bascom Hill, and when you go to the top of it, there's a big statue of Abraham Lincoln. And the night Barack Obama won, we all left wherever we lived and flooded the streets and all danced around Lincoln. We were Democrats. All right. Last Black American poem. Voted for the Negro twice. Twice my captor wore my face. Admit it, Danez, you loved your master in your shade. Yes, I loved knowing the color at the end of my chain matched mine. Wrong river. It wasn't chains, it was water when one of us helmed the boat. Water for our eyes, water raised to the lips of cargo, still cargo. In summer, we turned down that Jeezy, learning a new one's slain name. The helm, and still, the boat still headed to Carolina shores. My president was Black when mothers got millions in exchange for sons. Michelle's perm was perfect as bombs dropped in the middle of childhoods. We buried my grandpa with an Obama button pinned to his lapel. Finally free, we sent him to heaven, American. When he won, we sprinted Bascom Hill and danced like happy slaves at Lincoln's feet. We were happy ass slaves, happy to vote, happy to be able to protest the killing we couldn't end, happy for health care that killed us slower, happy the gays could marry in the country where trans women vanished like snow in warm winters, happy our wars were only of the mind, only elsewhere. Forgive me. I wrote odes to presidents. Thank you. I mean, what should we talk about that? Why? I don't know. I'm frustrated anew. With what time is it? Okay. I'm frustrated anew just with the bullshit. The bullshit being all of this, and I don't know. I'm just like, I got an immigrant husband, I got bad blood, I got all this stuff, I got this and I think this whole country should burn, but also my grandmama live here. And I don't want to burn down where my grandmama live at. And that incongruence that America places on the shoulders of the people that she moves upon. And here we go in the system again, right? 4 more years of some white person. I don't know what
I do have a question.
What's up?
Why is this book relevant now, and where is it pointing us?
Which book?
The curated
one, the Langston Hughes book.
Mm-hmm. Well, both actually.
The Langston, 2 things. One, especially because I think it's important just for us to engage with his work beyond what the scope of this book, right? There's a lot of his stuff that's out of print, right? So one of my hopes is that it does reinvigorate interest in Langston Hughes, right? For a new generation, right? Which I think is the work of us as the living to do that work of passing down. And if some young poet or kid who's interested in poetry, right, is quicker to pick up a Langston Hughes book because they see my name alongside it, that's great, Yeah, and because he was a genius, right? And I think what I really wanted to pull out, right, the whole thing behind so many of the little intros, but especially the introduction for the whole book, is what a wonderful time. I guess even the counterbalance to my being pissed off and fuck everything is my immense joy and love and just like awe of us, right? Of, you know, all the peoples, whatever that, you know, whatever adjective comes before my people, my blank people, right? There's so many sources of inspiration and things that are that we should lovingly and ferociously pour into, right? So that gives me hope too, right? And I think we see that in Langston Hughes, right? Never not clear about what the world is, but always loving Black folks at the center of it, right? And I think that is a powerful message to witness. When I think now in our current day, you know, depending on the paths you take or where you end up, right? I hope most people make it through make a life where they are able to love themselves and in their Blackness on the other side of childhood, right? But this is a world where we see it becoming, you know, for many of us, harder and harder to love yourself every day. And part of book bans, part of mass deportation, part of the hostility towards educators and librarians is because they are scared of what will happen if too many of us love ourselves enough to be dissatisfied with our condition. And so it's important that we look to Langston Hughes, who was a Black person in the 1920s with all the context and woe and weary and danger of being Black then, still saying, man, ain't we beautiful?
Can you read My People?
Yes.
The poem I'm finna read.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was gonna read poem. Which My People are you talking about? You're probably talking about the poem on you might be talking about the poem that's on 15.
I think you're on 15.
And
yeah.
I was gonna read the poem that's on 13. But people call this poem on 13 My People, so maybe I'll go for it. Danez, read the 15.
Which one you gonna read?
But Jimmy, I'm gonna read 13.
Okay, you gonna read 13. I'll read 15. My people. Dream singers, storytellers, dancers, loud laughers in the hands of fate, my people. Dishwashers, elevator boys, ladies' maids, crap shooters, cooks, waiters, jazzers, nurses of babies, loaders of ships, porters, hairdressers, comedians in vaudeville, and bandmen in circuses, dream singers, all storytellers, all dancers. God, what dancers, singers, God, what singers and dancers and laughers, yes, laughers, loud mouth laughers in the hands of fate.
Did you want to say something about that poem? Or? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll read this poem. This is on 13. I first heard this poem. First time I heard this poem, I heard a 16 or 16-year-old girl read it. And I kept thinking, I remember when she read it, I was like 13 or 4. I was 14 years old and she must have been 16 or 17. And I remember when she read it, I was thinking that I was in love with her. But really, I was just in love with the poem. But at the time, I was like, I could not stop thinking that she was a person walking around with this. She recited the poem from memory. And so every time I would see her in my hometown in Shreveport, I would just look at her like, that's the girl who knows that poem. She's just walking around with it, right? Like I remember once I saw her in the grocery store, and I remember looking at around the aisle like, she's just looking at stuff in the grocery store with that poem just in her head. Anyway, I love this poem. Okay. Poem. The night is beautiful, so the faces of my people. The stars are beautiful, so the eyes of my people. Beautiful also is the sun. Beautiful also are the souls of my people. I just don't know how he did that. I would like to do that. That is amazing. I think that is very good. It's couplets. The night is beautiful, so the faces of my people. The stars are beautiful, so the eyes of my people. Beautiful also is the sun. Beautiful also are the souls of my people. Just has to do with like a sense of metaphysics as well as a sense of music, sort of how to vary music in a way such that this sort of mounting sense of understanding shapes and sizes in a new way. You know, you go from faces being the night, eyes being the stars, and then, but then the sun is the soul. Do y'all know what I mean? It's so interesting that those transformations can happen in such a small amount of time. But the other thing that I think sort of makes this a poem is knowing all I got to do is add a word like also in 2 lines, and suddenly I'm dealing with something else. And musically, we have to like rise to the occasion. Mm-hmm. 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 So the faces of my people, so the eyes of my people. It's almost like this is therefore, right? That we are of the night, we are of the stars, right? I love this poem so much. I remember thinking this was true. Yeah, not according to that Danez Smith poem. I don't think it's, I don't know. I don't know that that's true. I mean, I do remember thinking that was true. I remember thinking that about Black people. But I don't know if I think that about Black people anymore.
Explain. What do you mean?
You just read the poem that literally said it's not true.
What about my poem says that Black people are beautiful, that our eyes aren't like all this?
Okay, maybe not.
I don't see that in my work. I see literally the exact opposite.
I feel really like there's this thing happening in the current moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's anybody's fault. Like maybe it's, you know, maybe it's Bill Cosby's fault or Thomas Sayers Ellis' fault or I don't know. What's the other guy's name? Before Sean Combs, there was a guy. Like I feel like it's R. Kelly. Like I feel like there's a thing that happened where you understood that a Black person could betray you. And it seemed to all happen at the same time. Like everybody came to a sudden understanding, oh, a Black person can betray you. Like a Black person can be capable of rape. A Black person can bomb the fuck out of a country. A Black person, do you know what I'm saying? But then after that, it seems to me that where we are now, Black people are mostly suspicious of one another. You don't feel that? Y'all don't feel that way? Y'all don't feel that like there's a suspicion that where I used to think I never minded like benefiting in any way from Black people because I was Black. You know, when I was a kid growing up and there were certain opportunities that came my way because somebody Black thought I was smart. That's how they say it in Shreveport. Or somebody Black thought I could read or somebody Black thought I could speak. Then there were certain things they would have me do. And then that would lead to more things. Do you know what I mean? But I don't feel that I see that happening in the same way at all. I definitely don't. You know, I used to, when we would be on these panels and committees trying to pick people for prizes, you would be in the back room and you'd be trying to figure out who was Black. And then you knew that's who you were going to fight for. And if somebody Black was in the room with you, that's who y'all were going to fight for. And was going to be a Black person to finally win that prize. And now when I go in the room, the other Black person be looking at me like, I'm not interested in this Black person.
But I think it depends on like what politic we share. Just because you're Black and we're not politically aligned, that means really nothing. Because like if you are not interested in my liberation or our collective liberation, what does that have to do with anything?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't have to do with anything, but isn't there, do y'all feel like it's like prove yourself to me, or do you feel like it's prove yourself against me? And I feel like you saying in this moment of crisis, but I know everybody wants to moment. I just don't think the moment is momentous. I'm sorry. I don't. I know people get mad at me about that.
I think we have lost across many cultures, but I'll just speak for Black people. I think there are ways in which we have lost some collectivity and even spaces for collectivity, right? When you think about, you know, even just like the church as gathering ground and how important that was, and the declining importance of the church in our community, right, means that we are also less collected. So I think that is happening. I think, there are ways in which we have gone to the individual, or just the me and mines, and so maybe a little bit of that, like, love thy neighbor, thy black neighbor, for real has like gone away from us, right? I don't think it's absent. Like, a lot of the things you're talking about being gone, I'm like, that's my life still. Like, I feel like I, like, in the poetry world, yes, in those rooms, I'm like, hey, Negroes, cool,
and
good.
you feel,
and like in my life, like, maybe because I still go to church, or because I teach at the Black Youth Healing Arts Center, or because I, do all these things, like, I am living a life where I see Black people loving and trusting and dreaming into one another, and I also know that those places are real good. I also know the great sadness in my heart, where I think, like, oh, there are also people who aren't getting this right now, right? And that's why I'm like, I wish everybody would come to this.
that's what I think about all the time.
And so, yeah, we're out of time.
No, I said that's what I think about all the time.
I think about. I was like,
I think about the fact that automatic benefit, that inherent, that benefit that I thought was just a benefit of Blackness. I just think that there are many people in another generation who are not experiencing that benefit in any way, in the smallest of towns. And I'm from one of those towns. I'm not from, like, a city, a big city. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't exist. Like, if it weren't for Black people thinking that they were supposed to go out of their way for me just because I was Black, no matter how bad I was. Do y'all know what I'm saying?
And I think and I think that's still happening. And also, like, and I hope what happens in my poem is not me saying that, like, oh, Barack Obama was, like, in a person who came into political consciousness after 9/11, and in the war on terror and the fuck Bush of it all. And then it was like the Black guy that they plastered hope behind. And then it, like, it's a new day. And so then also it was like, oh, like, okay, I guess we're protesting. Cool, he's not Bush. Word, buy into the American dream a little, like, not the American dream, right? But at least the possibility of something happening within the system. And then to see Barack do some good things and also continue to be a president in the way that American has of the United States of America, right? And that the poem is talking about that awakening out of that political disillusionment, right? It's not forgive me, I love Black people. It's forgive me, I believed in this, in the possibility of this office, right? Forgive me for, like, thinking that it wasn't what it is,
and that was
right. It's not let's all go hate the Black people.
But that's the thing that I think is possibly, like, generational. Maybe, I don't know, but I just never had a sense of possibility for the office.
Yeah, but this
you know
also
what I'm
feels
saying?
kind of to a way of, like, we don't talk about these things outside of the house. Is what I'm getting a little bit of that energy of, like, you shouldn't say those critiques about Obama.
No, please say critiques about Obama. I have always critiqued Obama.
But all, part of me critiquing Obama also has to be about what I'm trying to reveal is, like, I liked him because he was Black, right? And just being able to say, like, wow, what a limited understanding of power and love that was, to go ahead and adore this man because of his Blackness and the role he had. And what did I excuse in the moment because of that adoration, and because of our shared history, and because of how much it meant to my grandparents to be able to vote for him. It's untying that history, right? And I think we can untie our relationships to power and to sort of neat narratives of familiarity and still love our people, right? So
I hope so.
We have to, right? And also, it can't just be love everybody, because when it was all love everybody and also don't talk about outside of the house, my granddaddy was still in there whooping my grandma ass, right? Or the uncle was still coming around touching on everybody and their mama too, right? So, like, there were all these things, right? And so there is a little bit of I do think there is a little bit of necessary energy of, we're gonna go ahead and talk about what's messed up. We just gonna go ahead and say it. Right. And that is a little bit of the energy that I think is mashed up in some of this stuff. Right. I love I'll speak for myself. From my maternal side, there just was a lot of just not talking about it. you know. And now my mom's generation is one of the first generations of women to say, we're not going to get knocked up outside of the head because my mama didn't deserve to get knocked outside of the head. Right. And they are changing that for the young women in our family now, that they're passing that energy on to. Right. And to be able to say we went through that, but no more. Right. And so I also, as we watch on, you know, you could turn on the news right now and you'll see a bunch of black hands raising up the hands for the veto about whether there should be a ceasefire right now in Palestine. Right. And the reason I write a poem like that is for a young black reader. And it's not to say don't love or trust your people, but it is to say question when you see your people in positions of power, if they are doing something transformative or part of the regular script. Right. Because so that's it.
But couldn't it also be that if yeah. I guess for me, that would be sort of the expectation, though, is the difference. And that's the only difference. You know, I guess when I find out that certain people are doing certain things, you know, like when I know somebody's black and they're like a poet, I think they're going to be great because I think poets are generally great. But when I know somebody's black and they're like a president, I don't think they're going to be great. Or, you know, maybe that's just, do you know what I'm saying? Like, because I just think there's only so much you're going to do if that's what you want to do. Do you like, there's certain things, I don't mean to be any type of way. Like, I understand that good things can happen from all kinds of places, but there are certain desires. And I think that if you have the desire to do certain things, then in order for you to do those things, that means you're going to also end up committing a great deal of evil. Yeah. Yeah, we don't disagree.
Yeah, we don't disagree at all. I think the thing is just, it's just, I don't know, wipe a little dust off your eyes if you got in there.
Yeah.
See the world a little bit more clearly. All right, we are past time, but I don't want to, well, can we go a little long? Can we just do like 10 minutes of Q&A or something like that? Where,
before we go to Q&A, can you speak more on how you opened the book about black poets identifying as black poets?
Yeah. So there's an essay that I wanted to put the whole thing in there. But you can go read it for free on the Poetry Foundation's website. It is called The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain. Wait, hold on, was that? Yes. Let me make sure I got all the words.
The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain. It's on Poetry Foundation.
Yeah, it's on Poetry Foundation.
It's a few places. It's online.
It's definitely
you can find it. Yeah.
That's the place I got.
It's a great essay.
It's a brilliant essay, right? Where he's speaking to the necessity for black artists to identify as black, right? And not only to identify as black, right, but to do their work in a way that is informed by that blackness, right? You know, which leads to, you know, everything Jericho talked about earlier with the Duende, right? So it's a brilliant essay. And I think that, like, so he wrote that in the what was that? 19, you know?
No, it was I think it's more like 27.
Yeah, it was still.
I mean, it was when he was still very young.
Yeah, so still very young. Would make me feel like kind of call to arms.
Could be 29.
Call across Harlem. Right? Yeah, definitely still in the 20s. And I wanted to start there. Like I was saying, I just really wanted to think about what is our. I still find a lot of use in thinking about what is my role as a black artist, right? Not only towards what that means for my aesthetic and my tools of trying to bring blackness into my own laboratory, but in thinking about what, so that's like having a black process, but also making sure that, and I believe art is, process, right? Product is but the final plateau. That's the boring part. But then also that product is always thinking about, for me, there's always a little bit of like, what are black people going to get from this? And I don't think that always has to be a political, I mean, it is, right? But I think it was Gwendolyn Brooks who said she wanted her work to do three things for her people: either liberate, educate, or entertain. Right? And I love entertain there too, right? Because I just love thinking about joy and entertainment and pleasure when it comes to art making too, but I love that it has to live in constellation with those other three, right? That there's, if you're entertaining folks, but there is no liberation, kind of keeping folks laughing in prison, right? But there is this need to also educate and also think towards like that freedom is still a destination and not something we've arrived at. So that was it for me, right? Wanted to start there up here in Langston at such an early age, and I think it just is beautiful how clear he was so young. To me, just to encounter him having these questions at a time when I had a lot of the same questions and was feeling similar ways, or maybe feeling like, oh, what it like, kind of, it pulled me to center at a time when I needed it as well. So that's, how do we engineer something that one feels like Blackness when you touch it or when it touches you, but how do we also do something that gives Black people some type of wealth? And there's a lot of different answers to what that wealth can be. Really beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Any questions out there or online that we need to get to? Bettina Judd.
We do. Yep. Wait.
Oh, hold on one second.
Let me bring your mic. We got to get you on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this really beautiful conversation. I'd like to hear you all talk a little bit about, I think it's Jericho started off talking about this aspect of persona in Langston Hughes poems, where when it's a man, it's like a particular thing that he could be, but then when it's a woman, but then all the other personas are women. Could you talk a little bit more about gender? And I'm also thinking about this in like my memory of the essay of the Negro and the Racial Mountain, the Negro artist in the Racial Mountain, and like Langston Hughes writing in terms of gender.
I'll just say that in the essay, what's interesting is when he wants to point to examples of what people could be making use of that is within their own community, he always turns to Black women. He starts talking about somebody named Clara, who I don't know who that singer is. He talks about Bessie Smith. So there's a way that he sort of, in terms of like pointing at things that are definitely Black or produced by Black people at that moment, he seems to believe that if you look at the Black women in our community, then there's plenty for you to write about. Do you know what I mean? In terms of what they're making. And in that particular instance, it's jazz and blues, right? And interestingly enough, he doesn't mention the musicians, he mentions the singers, which means he's also turned on, it seems to me, by the lyric, right? About the word, not just the voice, but the words that these particular women of that time are saying in their songs. And then in the poems, he's always just, he is in his mask as, persona means mask, as a woman, always going to a river and killing herself. Do y'all know, like over and over again, like these women are like really sick of the bullshit. And they're like, I'm just going to go to the river and drown. Or they're going to kill the person that's not acting right. Right? It's like, I'm going to take a knife and I'm just going to slit his throat. Which I think also has to do with mirroring the kind of lyric that you hear in the blues at that time. So there is that, but I think there's also a kind of power of life and death in the women characters. Whereas like when I think of a poem like Theme for an English Bee, there is an acted upon, which is interesting because you would think of women characters sort of being acted upon in a way, and not that they're not, but they react too. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas in Theme for an English Bee and in other poems where the persona may or may not be Hughes, it seems that he is responding only, and not necessarily taking action, but figuring out things given what he's told. But I don't know if that's a direct answer about gender, but I do notice that difference between the men and the women in my own reading. And I think he was a diva lover, which is the other reason I think it's clear that he was queer. Like, there's a way that he loved Bessie Smith. There's a way he loved Black women singing that you know, like black women don't love black women singing like that. Do you know, like, don't nobody love black women singing like that but gay men? But that's, do you know what I'm saying? Like, when you read his prose and when you read anything he has to say about singing, when you read singing come up, it's giving like he is queening out. Like he's very much like sang. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Which is particular and cultural.
In terms of the poems in blues, or in this book, I'm thinking, even when it's so embodied, right? He has all these persona poems. There's one in the manuscript that for the play he was working on with Duke Ellington. That's all the women. It's a body voice of the women talking about it, the same as right? Here we are, still stuck up behind. Right? We ain't got shit. We'll go to work again. But I'm racking my head for a poem that is not about either the wanting of a man, the leaving of a man, or instruction for a man. And even a poem like Song for a Negro Washwoman, right? Even in there, it's her portrait, but even still, so much of it is about her service, right? And it's in the, you know, so I'm trying to think about if he ever really could disappear men from his poems of women, or if those women are sort of ever unburdened by, you know, womanly expectation. Let's say that, right? Or the expectations of a woman, right? Is she in herself, right? Even a poem like Mother to Son, right? It's still to the son, right? And that feels like a choice as opposed to just the mother thinking, you know, of herself and her life. So yeah, so I think even in his persona work, you know, kind of fails the Bechdel test, you know. So you know, so like, is that something to just notice about the craft, right? That he's unable to fully disappear inside the voice of a woman without this need for information to lead back to masculinity.
Yeah. I mean, and because he's actually looking at men, right? That's what it comes out. Yeah. But he needs a woman's voice in order to do that publicly or something.
I think also like thinking about the minstrel poem, about like how he just extends such grace to men in ways that he reaches for them. Like it takes a specific eye to allow for embodiedness in that way. But yeah, that's all that I'm thinking through.
But it is part of the reason why you can be bothered in a poem that's not first person. I'm a little bothered by the prostitute poem, Harlem. I think it's called Harlem Prostitute or something like that. Is that what it's called?
I think it's just prostitute.
Just prostitute. I was just kind of like, it's in the book. And I read the poem before, but every time I read it, I just want to like it. And I just am like, bro, young prostitute, not no old hoe, a young prostitute. So yeah, I just, you know, maybe you can read it since it's open to you, and it's only 3 or 4 lines.
5 lines. Yeah, it's super short. Young prostitute. Her dark brown face is like a withered flower on a broken stem. Those kind come cheap in Harlem, so they say.
I just felt like a little bit, I needed 2 more lines. You know what I mean? Because I don't know that the poem does anything other than what is already done in terms of the view.
There's a lot linking on that, so they say.
Yeah.
I think.
I just don't get enough.
But you want 2 more to be like, your stem ain't broken, girl. A road. It's still a road.
I think the problem baby girl is that the So They Say is doing that work. But I know that the So They Say is meant to do that. But as a reader, I don't know how to untie the So They Say so that I see it done. I understand that this is like, oh, but ironically. Do you understand? But it's almost like you're just saying, but ironically. And I'm like, ironically what? Then who is they?
The black people up in Harlem. That's what I thought.
Is it?
That's
because if you're a young prostitute in Harlem, and do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I'm not sure who they is.
It could be a lot of people, right? Because and that would add some more color and context, right? Is this the opinion of downtown on Harlem? Is it the woman looking out her window and saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
We got an online question from Akiba Harper that's a follow-up about the Duke Ellington part. So
Yeah.
how did you hear about the collaboration with Duke Ellington? Can you elaborate about that?
Yeah. I heard about it because they sent it to me. So the behind the scenes is I was pulled in kind of late on the project, right? Where they were like, they already had researchers go to these archives and had already pulled out work that they would send to me to curate, right? I wanted to go do some research, but there was not the time or more money. And so the Duke Ellington was thankfully part of, or the Duke Ellington collaboration was thankfully part of that treasure trove that came to me. It wasn't that long though. What they sent me. This is just a note out there. So part of my frustration, I'm gonna just be a little naked right now about the process. Was like, you know, that in that first thing, it was like they sent me, I think, like 40 pages worth of like unpublished stuff and asked me to publish a 100-page book. Exactly. So I think my learning lesson for this, and I think we made it happen. We pulled this stuff from these early publications, you know, a lot of stuff from that first book, The Weary Blues is in here. I think something like this, if I was to give myself some notes, needs to come from inside the archive, you know? I think it's hard for us to go and say, like, let's do a project of all the unpublished blah, blah, blah. And we don't necessarily know if that treasure trove necessarily exists or not. So yeah, I think this is great for what it is and the constraints that we have. And I hope that somebody with some research backing and the funding to do so spends a lot of good time. And I think there's probably even more Langston out there to discover and put forward in a critical way. So yeah, go travel in the archives.
And maybe it's in the end. Is there a way to know what's published and what's unpublished? Because all the poems felt like poems. When I got to the play, I was like, nah, I ain't never seen it. I was like, what is happening? But then reading the poems, I didn't really know that I was reading poems
you hadn't seen before. That was part
which gets weird with Langston Hughes. That's a story in and of itself about his, you know, work. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't necessarily tell, but I was interested in that, and I was also interested to know like what you thought about that, right? Because somebody comes to you and they tell you we're going to publish Langston Hughes unpublished poems, and you take that on, but that means you're also taking on the fact that somebody's going to publish your unpublished poem.
Yeah, and
like, what was that like?
I think it was, you know, there's a couple poems that I chose not to include for the very reason that I'm just like, this is a poem he wrote this was his high school, like, you know, poem for the senior class. Like, you know, it's cool, but like, you know, we don't really understand anything about, oh, wow, look at Langston writing when he's 17 when we read that poem. You know, there's nothing, I don't know. There were some things that I actually chose not to include. There were a couple little small notish things that, you know, it could be interesting to publish those. There was a version of the book where I think we had like put in like sort of these little fragments, right? It's just like, oh, here's like 5 words on a piece of notebook paper. What was that going to be? You know, it was rough. I'll say for me, and like, you know, because I think there was another version of the book that they decided against, where I had gathered stuff actually more clearly by like where it was published in these early years, right? So a lot of the stuff in the Weary Blues is there because I was like, cool, I want to do everything that was in the Crisis. And he basically published half that book in the Crisis, right? But the Crisis was the Crisis was the NAACP's literary magazine in the 20s into the 30s, I believe. And you know, so we did a lot of that, but in this ordering of the book, which goes more off theme, you sort of lose that understanding of, oh, this is all the stuff in the Crisis, right? It just becomes then spread out, right? Because the editors did not like that ordering of the book, as editors are. So they were like, can you make it more about theme? And all? So that's what happened. But then you lose sort of that understanding of like, oh, this is him knowing that Black people are about to read these poems, right? As opposed to the stuff he might have published in a more widespread magazine, right? Which is what I had did, but then they were like, do something else. And so I did something else.
Hold on one second.
Did you have access to an archivist who would walk you through like Hughes's composition practices? Because we talk about him like writing this poem on the train, blah blah.
Yeah,
blah.
I was told that was gonna have to come out my own pocket.
Oh, I see. All right, okay. Because a lot of what you're talking about of like feeling like these are poems that you are surprised that are not published is because he was doing a lot of that, like writing on the back of his grocery list and writing on the back of notebooks and just writing all the time. And there are like, when you go to the archives, there are multiple drafts of all of the poems that we know and love and were taught in Black History Month. So
he was also I mean, he understood he needed to be writing all the time because he wasn't going to take a permanent job anywhere. He was going to live off of his writing, which is very special for him. And it just seems good to mention. It's also the moment that he stops writing in longer lines. Like earlier, you know, the Negro Speaks of Rivers is a poem in long lines. But by the time Langston Hughes dies, he's known as this poet of the really skinny line. Well, he always said that was the case because he figured out that magazines paid by the line. And, you know, so when you look at it, and still today, you know, today when a poem is published in Poetry Magazine, you know it's gotten paid. You got more money for it than you did anywhere else. And so many people, when you look at the poems,
my long poems.
When you look at Langston Hughes' poems in Poetry Magazine, they're like these skinny little poems. He's like, give me all my money. Yeah.
You see how that sonnet is 89 lines?
Right.
Akiba just wanted to know a little bit more about the Duke Ellington. Like, is there anything else you can say about it?
Anything else I can say about it? I think you can kind of, I like this conversation we're having about maybe when he's in the male persona, he's, you know, maybe doing a lot of his own stories. So it's really beautiful in the Duke Ellington to watch his, if we're going to assume that Kako, you know, is that Langston is in there somewhere, that as he travels the world in this little moment as a sailor, going to the Caribbean, going to Africa really broadens his eyes about the conditions of Black people globally, right? So much of his understanding had been in the American setting, right? But in that play, you see the play is really about, you know, a Black man coming into his own, going on like all this hijinksy stuff going on in his travels, but also witnessing the condition of Black folks globally. And as he's pining for home, his understanding of that home changing as he goes about.
And Danez has published the notes.
The
that
notes
Langston
are in there,
took on the play.
Yeah.
As well as, I don't know, there's some talk here about what Duke Ellington's sort of part of things were. So it is interesting to see. For me, it was.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. We want to let our folks who are watching if you're watching with us online, we want to let you know you can click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy Blues in Stereo. We just want to make sure they know, you know, where to click. It's teal. They can buy it. And you can also buy the other poets' books as well. So click that teal button. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's teal. Thank y'all who are watching online for being with us tonight. We really appreciate you. We love having a big online audience. It's so great. So thank y'all. Stay safe. We appreciate you. This is going to be up on YouTube in a few days. So let folks know if they missed it.